The shuttle was falling apart around her when Elena Vance opened her eyes. Fire and smoke filled the small cabin. Warning lights flashed red in the darkness. The sound of tearing metal screamed through the air as the ship broke through the atmosphere of the alien world below. Elena was a sergeant in the United Earth Defense Force. She had been a soldier for 12 years. She had survived battles on 3 different worlds. But she had never been in a crash like this one. She remembered the ambush. Her shuttle had been on a simple scouting mission near the border of Valkyrie space. Then the enemy ships had appeared from nowhere. 3 of them against her one small vessel. The pilot had died in the first attack. The 2 other soldiers had died when the hull broke open. Only Elena had survived. Strapped into her seat in the back of the shuttle dock, now she was falling toward an enemy planet. Alone and wounded, the ground came up fast. Elena closed her eyes and held on tight. The impact threw her forward against her straps. Pain exploded through her body. Then everything went black. When she woke up again, she was being dragged across rocky ground. Alien hands held her arms. She could see 4 of them on each side of her body. The hands were covered in hard, shiny shells that looked like armor made of jewels. Elena looked up at her captors. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with bodies covered in that same shell-like armor. They had 4 arms each and heads that reminded her of insects from Earth. Their eyes were large and made of many small parts that caught the light in strange ways. The Valkyrie, humanity's newest enemy. The species that had conquered 200 worlds across the galaxy. The species that had given humanity a simple choice: surrender or die. Humanity had chosen to fight. The Valkyrie soldiers dragged Elena toward a large ship that sat on the rocky ground nearby. It was huge and black, shaped like a curved blade. She tried to count the soldiers around her, but lost track after 20. There were too many, and her head hurt too much. They took her inside the ship. The walls were dark metal covered in glowing symbols she could not read. The air smelled strange, like chemicals and something sweet underneath. Other Valkyrie stopped to watch as the soldiers dragged her past. Some of them made clicking sounds with their mouths that might have been words or might have been laughter. Finally, they brought her to a large room at the center of the ship. The ceiling was high and covered in lights that made everything look cold and blue. At the far end of the room stood a Valkyrie who was bigger than the others. His shell armor was darker, almost black, and covered in golden marks that seemed to show his rank. The soldiers threw Elena onto the floor in front of him. She landed hard on her hands and knees. Blood dripped from a cut on her head and fell onto the metal floor. Her whole body ached, but Elena did not cry out. She would not give them that satisfaction. The large Valkyrie walked toward her slowly. His feet made heavy sounds on the floor. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, translated by a small device on his chest. "I am Commander Zorth of the Valkyrie Dominion," he said, "and you are my prisoner." Elena said nothing. She just looked up at him with steady eyes. Zorth leaned down to look at her more closely. His compound eyes reflected her face back at her dozens of times. She could see how small and broken she must look to him. "This is the species that refused our generous offer?" Zorth said to the other Valkyrie in the room. "This soft, fragile, breakable thing?" The other Valkyrie made those clicking sounds again. This time, Elena was sure it was laughter. Zorth reached out with one of his 4 hands and grabbed her chin. He turned her head from side to side, studying her like she was an animal in a cage. "No natural armor," he observed. "No claws. No venom. A single heart, I am told. Bones that snap like dry sticks." He let go of her chin and stood up straight again. "How did your species even become intelligent? You should have been eaten by predators long before you learned to think." More laughter from the watching Valkyrie. Elena stayed quiet. But she was not doing nothing. Her eyes moved around the room, memorizing everything she saw. The positions of the guards, the locations of the doors, the weapons the soldiers carried, the control panels on the walls. She noticed that the Valkyrie all stood in the same lazy way. Their weapons hung loose at their sides. None of them watched her with any real attention. They had already decided she was not a threat. She was too small, too weak, too human. That was their first mistake. Zorath turned to one of his officers. Put her in a holding cell. The scientists will want to study her and send a message to the human fleet. Let them see what becomes of those who resist the Dominion. Two soldiers grabbed Elena's arms and pulled her to her feet. As they dragged her out of the room, she heard Zorath speak one more time. "Such a disappointing species," he said. "I expected more from the creatures that dared to refuse us. But they are nothing. They will fall like all the others." The soldiers took Elena down a long hallway and threw her into a small cell. The door slid shut behind her with a heavy sound. She was alone in the darkness. For a long moment, Elena sat on the cold floor and did not move. Her body hurt everywhere. She was tired and hungry and very far from home. The logical part of her brain told her that she should be afraid. She was a prisoner on an enemy ship with no weapons, no allies, and no hope of rescue. But Elena was not afraid. She was angry. These aliens had destroyed her shuttle. They had killed her friends. They were planning to destroy her entire species. And they thought she was nothing. They thought she was weak and helpless and already defeated. Elena smiled in the darkness of her cell. It was not a nice smile. The Valkyrie had conquered 200 worlds. They had never lost a war. They had never faced an enemy they could not crush. They had never faced humanity. Elena closed her eyes and began to plan. The Valkyrie saw a broken prisoner. They saw a weak creature from a weak species. They saw a trophy to show off and then throw away. They did not see the truth. They did not see the 12 years of combat training. They did not see the survival instincts that had kept humans alive through ice ages and plagues and wars. They did not see the cold, patient anger that was already building inside her. They would learn. They would all learn. The Valkyrie did not simply keep Elena in her cell. That would have been too easy. That would have been merciful. And the Valkyrie were not interested in mercy. On the first day after her capture, soldiers came to her cell and put metal chains on her wrists. They led her through the ship like a pet on a leash. Officers stopped in the hallways to look at her. They pointed at her with their many hands and made clicking sounds of amusement. Some of them took pictures with small floating devices that hovered in the air. "Look at the human," they said to each other. "Look at how small it is. Look at how soft its skin is. Can you believe this species thinks it can fight us?" Elena walked with her head held high. She did not react to their words. She did not show fear or anger or shame. She just kept her eyes open and watched everything around her. She counted the doors they passed. She memorized the turns they took. She studied the way the guards held their weapons and the patterns of their movements. Every piece of information might be useful later. On the second day, the scientists came for her. They took her to a bright white room filled with strange machines. A tall Valkyrie in different colored armor stood waiting for her. This one had symbols on its shell that marked it as a scientist rather than a soldier. "Fascinating," the scientist said, walking in circles around Elena. "Truly fascinating. I have studied many species, but I have never seen one quite like this." The scientist poked at Elena's arm with a thin metal tool. It hurt, but Elena did not move. "No natural armor at all," the scientist observed. "The skin is so thin I can see the blood moving underneath. One good strike, and this creature would be destroyed." Other scientists gathered around to look. They talked about Elena as if she could not hear them, as if she was an object rather than a person. The skeleton is made of calcium, one said. It breaks under pressure that would not even scratch our shells. Only one heart, another added. And such a slow one. If it stops, the creature dies. How inefficient. No venom. No natural weapons. No ability to regrow lost limbs. The first scientist shook its head in wonder. I do not understand how this species survived long enough to develop intelligence. They should have gone extinct millions of years ago. The lead scientist leaned close to Elena's face. Its compound eyes studied her with cold curiosity. Tell me, human, it said, how did your species survive on your homeworld? You have no natural defenses. You are slow and weak and fragile. What kept you alive? Elena looked directly into those alien eyes. Spite, mostly, she said. The scientist made the clicking sound of laughter. The joke spread quickly through the room and then through the ship. Soon, Valkyrie all over the vessel were repeating her answer to each other. Spite. The human thinks spite kept her species alive. How amusing. How pathetic. How very, very funny. Elena did not mind being laughed at. While they laughed, they were not watching her carefully. While they thought she was a joke, they were not treating her as a threat. On the third day, Commander Zorath decided to broadcast Elena's capture to the galaxy. They brought her to the command center of the ship. A huge room filled with screens and control panels. Valkyrie officers worked at dozens of stations, managing the great vessel called the Inevitable Triumph. At the center of it all stood Zorath, tall and proud and absolutely certain of his own power. Today we send a message, Zorath announced, to the humans, to all species who might think of resisting us. Look upon this creature and understand the truth. The Valkyrie Dominion cannot be stopped. Lights focused on Elena. Cameras floated around her, capturing her image from every angle. She knew that this broadcast would be seen by millions, perhaps billions of beings across space. She knew her own people would see her like this, in chains, surrounded by enemies. She made sure to stand straight. She made sure to show no fear. Zorath walked over to her and placed one of his large hands on her shoulder. His grip was strong enough to bruise. This is a human soldier, he said to the cameras. One of the best their species has to offer. And look at her. Broken. Defeated. Helpless. He squeezed her shoulder harder. This is what happens to those who oppose us. This is the fate of all who resist. Elena stayed silent, but her eyes moved across the room, studying everything. The positions of the control panels, the way the officers worked their stations, the symbols on the screens that she was beginning to understand. She noticed something interesting. The Valkyrie relied heavily on their machines. Everything on the ship was automatic. The doors opened by themselves. The lights adjusted by themselves. Even the weapons of the soldiers seemed to aim and fire partly on their own. The Valkyrie had been waiting for so long that they had stopped doing things for themselves. They had built machines to do the hard work. They had forgotten how to struggle. Elena filed this information away in her mind. After the broadcast, the guards took her back to her cell. But now other Valkyrie came to visit her throughout the day. Officers who wanted to pose for pictures with the human prisoner. Soldiers who wanted to see the strange creature up close. Even common workers who had never seen an alien before. They all laughed at her. They all clicked their mandibles and told each other how weak she looked. They all walked away feeling superior and powerful and completely safe. None of them noticed that her chains were slightly loose. The Valkyrie had designed them for their own prisoners, beings with shells and rigid joints. They had not thought about how flexible human bodies could be. They had not considered that humans could bend in ways that Valkyrie could not. None of them noticed that Elena was learning their language. She listened to every conversation. She studied every symbol. Slowly, word by word, she was beginning to understand. none of them noticed that her eyes never stopped moving, that she counted every guard, that she timed every patrol, that she memorized the location of every important system on the ship. They thought she was just sitting in her cell, defeated and waiting to die. They could not have been more wrong. On the night of the third day, Elena sat alone in her cell and went over her plan one more time. She knew the layout of the ship now. She knew where the important systems were. She knew the weak points that the Valkyrie did not even realize they had. She knew how to hurt them. Tomorrow she would begin. Tomorrow, the Valkyrie would learn what humans were really capable of. Tomorrow, they would learn why spite had kept her species alive for so many thousands of years. Tomorrow, they would stop laughing. Elena closed her eyes and smiled that cold, dangerous smile. The Valkyrie thought the war was already over. They thought humanity had already lost. They had no idea that the war was just about to begin. The night was quiet on the inevitable triumph. Most of the crew had gone to their sleeping quarters. Only a few guards walked the dark hallways, their footsteps echoing on the metal floors. Elena sat in her cell and waited. She had learned the patterns of the guards over the past 3 days. She knew exactly when they passed her cell and how long she had between their visits. But before she could begin her plan, something unexpected happened. The door to her cell slid open, and the young Valkyrie stepped inside. This one was smaller than the others, with lighter-colored armor that had not yet darkened with age. Its movements were quick and nervous, not slow and confident like the officers Elena had seen. "You are awake," the young Valkyrie said. It sounded surprised that Elena did not move from her position on the floor. "Yes," she said simply. The young alien looked around the cell as if checking to make sure they were alone. Then it sat down on the floor across from Elena, folding its forearms in its lap. "I am Thyres," it said. "I am a junior officer on this ship. I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" Elena asked. "About your species." Thyres leaned forward, its compound eyes bright with curiosity rather than contempt. "I have been watching the broadcasts. I have been listening to what the scientists say about you. But I do not think they are asking the right questions." Elena raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "They keep talking about how weak humans are," Thyres said. "How you have no armor, no claws, no venom. How you should have died out long ago. But you did not die out. You survived. You built cities and ships and weapons. You reached the stars." The young Valkyrie shook its head slowly. "The scientists say you are weak, but weak species do not do these things. So I want to know the truth. How did you survive?" Elena studied the young alien for a long moment. This one was different from the others. This one actually wanted to understand. "You really want to know?" she asked. Thyres nodded its large head. Elena shifted her position on the floor. "Fine," she said. "I will tell you about Earth, about my homeworld, about what it took to survive there." She began with the Ice Ages. She told Thyres about a time when huge sheets of frozen water covered most of the planet, when the temperature dropped so low that many species died, when food became so scarce that survival seemed impossible. "Humans survived," Elena said. "We had no fur thick enough to keep us warm. We had no fat reserves like the great bears. So we learned to make fire. We learned to make clothes from the skins of animals. We learned to build shelters. We adapted." She told Thyres about the predators, about lions and wolves and bears that were bigger and stronger and faster than humans, about creatures with claws and fangs that could tear a human apart in seconds. "We could not outrun them," Elena said. "We could not fight them with our bare hands. So we made weapons, spears and arrows and traps. We learned to hunt in groups. We learned to think ahead, to plan, to outsmart our enemies. And in the end, we did not just survive. We became the most dangerous predators on our world. She told diaries about the plagues, diseases that swept across continents and killed millions. Tiny enemies that could not be seen or fought with weapons. We died in great numbers, Elena admitted. But not all of us. Some always survived. And those survivors passed on their strength to their children. We got tougher. We got harder to kill. She told diaries about the wars. Human against human, nation against nation, fighting over land and resources and ideas. We learned to fight, Elena said. We learned strategy and tactics. We learned how to build weapons that could destroy entire cities. We learned how to survive anything our enemies could throw at us. Finally, she told diaries about the journey to space. About wooden ships that crossed the oceans and metal ships that crossed the void between stars. About the endless human drive to explore, to expand, to survive. Your species has been in space for 12,000 years, Elena said. You have conquered 200 worlds. You have won every war you have ever fought. But think about what that means. Diaries tilted its head. It means we are strong. No, Elena said quietly. It means you have forgotten what it is like to struggle. You have forgotten what it is like to truly fight for survival. You have become comfortable. You have become careless. You have become weak. Diaries stiffened. We are not weak. We are the Valkyrie Dominion. We are the greatest power in the galaxy. Elena leaned forward. Her eyes were cold and hard. My species has been fighting to survive since the moment we came into existence, she said. Every day of our history has been a battle. We have faced extinction dozens of times, and every time we have clawed our way back. We are not comfortable. We are not careless. We are survivors. And that is something your people have not been for a very, very long time. Thyras was silent for a long moment. Its compound eyes reflected Elena's face. You think you can defeat us, Thyras finally said. One human, alone on our ship, with no weapons and no allies. You actually think you can win? Elena smiled that cold, dangerous smile. Watch and learn, she said. Thyras stared at her for another long moment. Then it stood up and left the cell without another word. The door slid shut behind it. Elena waited until the sound of footsteps faded away. Then she got to work. She had learned from watching the Valkyrie that their joints were rigid. They could not bend the way humans could. They could not twist or squeeze through small spaces. Their bodies were strong, but not flexible. Elena grabbed her own thumb and took a deep breath. This was going to hurt. With a quick practice motion, she dislocated her thumb. Pain shot up her arm, but she did not make a sound. She pulled her hand through the metal chain that bound her wrists. The chain slid off, scraping against her skin. She was free. Elena stood up slowly and moved to the door of her cell. She had watched the guards type in their codes on the control panel outside. She had memorized the pattern of their fingers. She reached through the small gap at the edge of the door and found the control panel. Her fingers were just thin enough to reach the buttons. She typed in the code. The door slid open. Elena stepped out into the dark hallway. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind was calm. She knew exactly where she needed to go. She knew exactly what she needed to do. The Valkyrie thought they had captured a helpless prisoner. They thought humanity was weak and defeated. They were about to learn the truth. Elena moved through the shadows like a ghost, heading toward the heart of the ship. Behind her, her empty cell sat dark and silent. The war had begun. Elena moved through the ship like a shadow. The hallways of the inevitable triumph were dark at night. Most of the lights had been dimmed to save power while the crew slept. Only emergency lights glowed along the floors, casting everything in a faint blue color. It was perfect for hiding. Elena had memorized the patrol routes of the guards. She knew exactly when they would pass each section of the ship. She knew which corridors were empty and which ones to avoid. She moved quickly and quietly, pressing herself against walls and ducking into doorways whenever she heard footsteps. The Valkyrie did not expect anyone to be moving through their ship. They had no prisoners who could escape. They had no enemies who could reach them here. Their security was designed to stop attacks from outside, not threats from within. They had never imagined that a single human could be a threat from within. Elena's first stop was the maintenance section. She found a small room filled with tools and supplies. Most of the equipment was designed for Valkyrie hands, too big and awkward for her to use. But she found what she needed: a thin metal rod that could be used as a weapon, and a small device that the Valkyrie used for cutting wires. She tucked both items into her belt and kept moving. Her next stop was the atmospheric control room. This was the heart of the ship's life support systems. The machines here cleaned the air and kept the temperature stable for the entire vessel. Without them, everyone on board would slowly suffocate. Elena studied the control panels. The symbols were in the Valkyrie language, but she had been learning for 3 days. She could understand enough to know what each system did. She did not want to kill everyone on the ship. She was a soldier, not a murderer. But she needed to create chaos. She needed to make the Valkyrie panic. Elena used the cutting tool to open a panel on the wall. Inside, she found a nest of wires and tubes that carried air throughout the ship. She did not cut them. Instead, she made small changes. She loosened connections. She crossed wires that should not be crossed. She set the system to slowly malfunction over the next few hours. The Valkyrie would not die, but they would have trouble breathing. They would become tired and confused. And by the time they figured out what was wrong, Elena would be long gone. Her next target was the gravity control room. The Valkyrie relied on artificial gravity to keep everyone walking on the floors of the ship. Without it, everything would float freely. Soldiers could not fight properly. Officers could not give orders. The whole crew would be helpless and disoriented. Elena found the gravity control systems and made similar small changes. She did not turn off the gravity completely. She set it to fluctuate randomly, sometimes lighter, sometimes heavier, changing without warning. It would make everyone sick and confused. She smiled as she worked. The Valkyrie had built their ship to be controlled by machines. They had automated everything because they were too comfortable to do things themselves. But machines could be broken. Machines could be turned against their masters. Elena's final target was the most dangerous: the reactor core. Every ship needed power. The inevitable triumph was powered by a massive reactor at its center. The reactor was heavily guarded and protected by multiple layers of security. But Elena had watched the engineers moving through the ship. She had memorized the codes they used. She had studied the layout of the reactor, room from the maps on the walls. She knew how to get in. The reactor room was located deep in the belly of the ship. Elena had to pass through several checkpoints to reach it. At each one, she used the code she had memorized and the maintenance uniform she had stolen from the supply room. The guards barely looked at her. Why would they? She was small and quiet and looked like she belonged. Finally, she reached the reactor itself. It was huge. A massive cylinder of glowing metal that hummed with power. Pipes and wires spread out from it in all directions, carrying energy to every part of the ship. Control panels surrounded it, displaying numbers and symbols that Elena could only partly understand. She did not need to understand everything. She only needed to understand one thing: how to make the reactor fail. Elena studied the controls carefully. The Valkyrie had designed the reactor with no manual override. They trusted their machines completely. They had never imagined that someone might want to sabotage it. From inside, that was their biggest mistake. Elena found the cooling system controls. The reactor generated enormous heat. Without proper cooling, It would overheat and eventually explode. She could not make it explode immediately. That would kill her too. But she could start a chain reaction that would take hours to complete. She made her changes quietly and carefully. Then she slipped out of the reactor room and headed for the communication center. This was the most dangerous part of her plan. She needed to send a message. She needed to let the Volcari know what was happening. She needed to make them afraid. The communication center was staffed even at night. Elena waited outside, watching through a small window. There were 3 officers inside, monitoring the ship's messages. She took a deep breath. Then she moved. Elena burst through the door before the officers could react. She struck the first one in the throat with her metal rod. It collapsed, choking and gasping. She hit the second one in the side of its head, stunning it. The third one reached for a weapon, but Elena was faster. She grabbed its arm and twisted, using leverage to flip the much larger Volcari over her shoulder and onto the floor. All 3 were down in seconds. Elena moved to the main control panel. Her fingers flew across the buttons, connecting her voice to the entire ship's intercom system. Then she began to speak. Her voice echoed through every hallway, every room, every corner of the inevitable triumph. Attention, Volcari crew. This is Sergeant Elena Vance of the United Earth Defense Force, the prisoner you captured. The weak, fragile, helpless human. She could imagine the Volcari waking up in their quarters, confused and alarmed. She could imagine Commander Zorath's face as he heard her voice. You asked me how my species survived our homeworld, Elena continued. I told you, spite. You thought that was funny. You laughed at me. You laughed at humanity. Alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Elena could hear running footsteps in the hallways outside. Let me explain what spite really means. It means we do not give up. It means we do not surrender. It means when you knock us down, we get back up. And when you laugh at us, we make you regret it. She paused to let her words sink in. Your atmospheric systems are failing. Your gravity is unstable. And your reactor is heading toward critical failure. You have a few hours to evacuate this ship before it becomes your tomb. Elena could hear the panic starting. Voices shouting. Feet running. The ship was waking up to a nightmare. You thought you had captured a helpless animal. You thought you had won. But you made a mistake. You underestimated us. And that is the last mistake you will ever make. She disconnected from the intercom and ran. The hallways were chaos now. Volcari rushed in every direction, trying to understand what was happening. The lights flickered as the power fluctuated. Some soldiers floated briefly when the gravity failed, then crashed to the floor when it returned. Elena moved through the confusion like a ghost. She had studied the ship. She knew where the escape pods were. She knew how to reach them. Behind her, she heard Commander Zorath's voice booming through the ship, trying to restore order. But it was too late. The damage was done. The inevitable triumph was dying. Elena reached the escape pods and climbed inside one. She strapped herself in and launched as the small pod shot away from the massive warship. Elena looked back through the window. She could see the inevitable triumph beginning to break apart. Fires burned along its hull. Escape pods launched in every direction as the crew abandoned ship. Elena smiled. The Volcari had laughed at her. They had called humanity weak and pathetic and doomed. They were not laughing now. Diaries floated in the darkness of space and waited to die. The escape pod was small and crowded. 7 other Volcari survivors shared the tiny space with him. They were all wounded or in shock. Some of them stared at nothing with empty eyes. Others made quiet, clicking sounds of distress. Theris looked out the small window at what remained of the inevitable triumph. The great warship was gone. It had broken into 1,000 pieces that now drifted slowly through the void. Fires still burned in some sections where oxygen had not yet escaped. Frozen bodies floated among the wreckage. Valkyrie soldiers who had not reached the escape pods in time. Commander Zorath was dead. He had refused to leave the ship until it was too late. His pride had killed him. One human had done this. One single human, with no weapons, no allies, no hope. She had destroyed the flagship of the Valkyrie Dominion and killed hundreds of warriors. Thyris thought about the conversation he had with her in her cell. He remembered her words about ice ages and predators and plagues. He remembered her cold smile when she told him to watch and learn. He had learned. 3 days later, a Valkyrie patrol ship found the escape pods. Thyris was half dead from cold and hunger when they pulled him aboard. The medics treated his wounds and gave him food and water. But they could not treat the other thing that was wrong with him. The medics called it shock. Thyris knew it was something more. It was understanding. When Thyris was strong enough to walk, he was summoned to the high command. The leaders of the Valkyrie Dominion wanted to know what had happened to the inevitable triumph. They wanted to understand how a single human could destroy one of their greatest warships. The high command met in a vast chamber on the Valkyrie homeworld. Hundreds of senior officers sat in a great circle, their compound eyes fixed on Thyris as he stood alone in the center. "Tell us what happened," the Supreme Commander ordered. She was ancient and scarred, her shell darkened by centuries of war. "Tell us how the flagship was lost." Thyris told them everything. He told them about the capture of the human soldier, about the broadcast they had sent to mock humanity, about the way the crew had laughed at the small, soft, fragile creature in chains. He told them about his conversation with the prisoner, about the ice ages and the predators, about the plagues and the wars, about the wooden ships and the journey to the stars. "She told me that we had forgotten what it means to struggle," Thyris said. "She told me that 12,000 years of victory had made us weak. I did not believe her then. I believe her now." The chamber was silent. The officers of the high command shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "One human," the Supreme Commander said slowly. "One human destroyed our flagship. Are you telling us that we should be afraid of these creatures?" Thyris looked up at the ancient leader. He thought about Elena's cold smile. He thought about the way she had moved through the ship like a ghost, breaking systems that the Valkyrie had trusted completely. He thought about her voice over the intercom, calm and steady, even as chaos erupted around her. "Yes," Thyris said. "I am telling you to be afraid." The chamber erupted in angry, clicking sounds. Officers shouted at Thyris, calling him a coward, a fool, a traitor. But Thyris stood firm. "I have seen what one human can do," he said over the noise. One human, alone and wounded, with nothing but her hands and her mind. Imagine what millions of them can do. Imagine what billions of them can do, all working together, all fighting for survival. The noise slowly faded. The officers looked at each other with uncertain eyes. "They are not like the other species we have conquered," Thyris continued. "The others gave up when they saw our strength. They surrendered when they knew they could not win. But humans do not surrender. They do not give up. They fight until there is nothing left of them, and then they find a way to fight some more." He paused to let his words sink in. The human called it spite. I think now I understand what she meant. It is not just stubbornness. It is not just anger. It is something deeper. It is the absolute refusal to accept defeat, no matter how certain that defeat seems. The Supreme Commander was silent for a long moment. Her ancient eyes studied Thyris with an expression he could not read. "What do you suggest we do?" she finally asked. Thyris had thought about this question for 3 days as he drifted in the escape pod. He had thought about the human's words, about the look in her eyes, about the calm way she had promised to make them regret their laughter. "I do not know if we can defeat them," he admitted. But I know that we cannot defeat them by underestimating them. We cannot defeat them by laughing at them. We must treat them as the threat they truly are." The High Command discussed and debated for hours. In the end, they decided to send the larger fleet to crush humanity once and for all. They would not make the same mistake twice. They would not underestimate their enemy again. But Tyrus saw the doubt in their eyes. He heard the hesitation in their voices. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Valkyrie were not certain of victory. For the first time, they were afraid. Far across the galaxy, humanity received a strange transmission. It came from the Valkyrie ship just before it exploded. Someone on board had been recording everything that happened. The footage showed Elena Vance escaping her cell, sabotaging the ship's systems, and delivering her message to the crew. The footage spread across human space like wildfire. People watched the small, wounded soldier take apart a vessel 1,000 times her size. They heard her voice, calm and steady, explaining to the Valkyrie exactly what they had done wrong. "You underestimated us, and that is the last mistake you will ever make." The words became a rallying cry. Soldiers painted them on their ships. Civilians whispered them to each other like a prayer. A species that had been afraid of the Valkyrie, Dominion suddenly felt something new. Hope. No one knew if Elena Vance had survived. Her escape pod had been tracked for a short distance before disappearing from sensors. Some said she had died in the explosion. Others said she had been picked up by a passing ship. A few even claimed to have seen her, alive and well, preparing for the next battle. The truth did not matter. What mattered was what she had shown them. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not defeated. Humanity was not going to surrender. The Valkyrie had conquered 200 worlds. They had never lost a war. They had never faced an enemy they could not crush. But they had never faced humanity. As the Valkyrie fleet gathered for its attack, as ships from across the Dominion prepared for what they believed would be an easy victory, a different kind of preparation was happening on 100 human worlds. Soldiers trained and armed themselves. Engineers built new weapons and new ships. Scientists studied everything they had learned about the Valkyrie and looked for more weaknesses to exploit. And everywhere, people remembered the words of Sergeant Elena Vance. The Valkyrie had laughed at them. The Valkyrie had called them weak and fragile and doomed. Now, humanity was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The war had only just begun. And this time, it was humanity's turn to smile. In a small ship somewhere between the stars, Elena Vance watched the lights of distant worlds and allowed herself a moment of rest. Her body still ached from her wounds. Her hands still bore the marks of her escape, but she was alive. She was free, and she was ready. The Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake when they captured her. They had made an even worse mistake. When they laughed at her, now they would learn the price of that mistake. Now they would learn what humanity could really do. Elena closed her eyes and smiled. The galaxy would never be the same again.